Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're going back to 1924. We're going to be talking about the case of Leopold and Loeb. This is perhaps one of the most famous murder cases in U.S. history, maybe even in world history, dealing with the murder of Bobby Franks from 1924. But there are going to be some very specific elements that we're going to be focusing in on. Now, when it comes to this exact case, I mean, we've mentioned a few lines about Leopold and Loeb on this channel before, but we've never really done an entire upload on this particular case. You dealt with two individuals who were roughly around the college age, if you want to call it that. I believe Leopold was only 19 at the time, and Loeb was around a similar age as well, and they were trying to commit the perfect crime, of course. And there's so many psychological elements that go into this particular case. I was actually in Chicago recently, and I had the chance to listen to kind of a presentation on Leopold and Loeb. And, you know, like, there are some big questions that I sort of wanted to know, because I first found out about this case because of the History Channel, of all things. I must have been 9 or 10 years old, very, very close to around the time of when I first found out about the Zodiac. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I first heard about the Zodiac in, like, kind of the first episode that the History Channel was doing, and then immediately after that one, they put on an episode of Leopold and Loeb. You know, like you're watching, like, two programs in a row, something like that. And this case has always stayed with me. I haven't been as closely involved with Leopold and Loeb, most likely because this is one that's been solved. We know who the murderers are. We know who the victim was. We know what happened. Nathan Leopold Jr. and Richard Loeb murdered a guy named Bobby Franks, and they murdered him. You know, he was just a kid. And they were caught. They pled guilty. It's kind of like some elements that are very similar to O.J. Simpson. They make enormous parallels between Leopold and Loeb and O.J. Simpson, someone who's coming from kind of a well-off status, and then they have kind of a high-profile lawyer who's brought in to try and save the day. But quite interestingly, in the Leopold and Loeb case, they pled guilty. One of the things, though, that really stood out to me, the absolute largest thing that stood out to me when I was watching that episode on the History Channel 20 years ago, was that they were saying that Nathan Leopold Jr. was an outstanding genius who had an IQ of over 200. I might be actually quoting that line exactly. An outstanding genius with an IQ of over 200. That's the thing that stood out to me. And they said that he had an IQ of 210, actually. That was something that I was just like, I didn't even know that people's IQs could get above 200 at that time, and I was just like, wait, really? And then then I was like, how is this guy involved in the murder case? During that presentation that I had a chance to watch in Chicago, I asked a question at the end when I was just sort of like, what role do you think apathy played in this setup? Because they talk about the Nietzschean Superman, like someone being so intelligent that they are above the system. But I was really curious about the concept of apathy, being apathetic and indifferent to humanity, apathetic and indifferent to society. Because someone once told me that once you do not care about the system, it is easier to manipulate it, because you are not emotionally involved. Someone once told me that, and I was like, well, does that apply to the Leopold and Loeb case? I mean, you have this brilliant individual in Leopold. Loeb does not seem like any kind of dummy. He doesn't seem like an idiot. Granted, they did get caught, and that kind of just goes to show you that this is a lot more than just two guys that dropped a pair of glasses that got set up with this. No, I mean, there was an enormous amount of forensic evidence that tied Leopold and Loeb to the case. They wrote a ransom note, and they were able to match the typewriter used in that note to the guys. I mean, there was definitive physical evidence on multiple fronts. It's just the thing about dropping glasses in the, when, like, it's kind of in the field or whatever you'd want to call it. That was just sort of the catalyst that put things in motion. That was just sort of something that kicked things off. And I'm really kind of making the assumption that you guys are somewhat familiar with the Leopold and Loeb case when we're doing this discussion. But I asked that question. Do you think that these were just guys that were kind of apathetic to the system? They were very intelligent, and they learned how to manipulate society. They learned how to manipulate people. And I got a very interesting response. And the sort of response to that was no. It was more like these guys were lovers. Leopold and Loeb were lovers. And it was actually Richard Loeb that was not exactly the leader. I mean, because you were talking about just two people, a social dyad. It was more like Richard Loeb was the dominant figure. And when Nathan Leopold would do what he wanted, Richard Loeb would reward him with sexual favors, sexual rewards. You can imagine. So, that goes to show you that regardless of someone's intelligence level, I mean, if it is true that Nathan Leopold had an IQ of 210 or something like that, he could still be manipulated through sexuality. I mean, life is just kind of crazy. And it's actually possible that Richard Loeb was involved with other murders that were not completely attributed to him. I mean, in short, that they did not have the proof. That could be very possible. And it's also, there are, I mean, even a wide variety of crimes that were attributed to Richard Loeb. But one of the things was, I believe the typewriter that they wrote the ransom note on was actually stolen from some sort of I believe that Leopold and Loeb stole that thing together because they were involved in some sort of kind of just because they could get away with it. It was some very, very silly scenario. But the point is, this is just kind of the motivation for this particular upload here. Leopold and Loeb went on to become one of the most famous trials in the 20th century. We're dealing with the murder, of course, in 1924 of Bobby Franks. And the thing that just always stood out to me was kind of the psychological factors that went into this. And the kind of, perhaps, keystone of this all, sexuality. I mean, there is that famous saying, right? Why do people commit crimes? Money, sex, or power? I mean, power and sexuality definitely go hand in hand with it when you're dealing with someone who's like the dominant partner in this relationship. I had recently began to think, that they were more about things, as I said, about just kind of being apathetic and indifferent to the system, so they thought that they could manipulate it. They weren't emotionally involved with society. Or, if you want to look at it more from that thing attributed to the Nietzschean Superman, they thought that they were so intelligent and they were so superior that they could do this because they knew how to manipulate their way around other people. They're more intelligent than everyone. They're not going to get caught. And it's, when you sort of say it out like that, there's the very slight possibility that something like that could be true. But in reality, it also seems like Nathan Leopold was going along with this stuff because the guy that he was attracted to was a kind of coercing him, or at the very least, kind of put him under his spell. I say that very, very metaphorically. Put him under his spell. So when we want to examine kind of the whole psychological aspect of this case, no matter how intelligent somebody is, they can still be susceptible to sexual manipulation. If you don't think that's fascinating, I'm not really sure what to tell you. To me, that's just kind of like literally mind-blowing. Ooh, I probably shouldn't have used that expression. But it's like, this is also a very, very heinous case. Because the thing with, not only did Leopold and Loeb really kind of destroy the Franks family, they're saying that the mother of Bobby Franks would just kind of, she sort of went into a repressive state where she would deny that her son was dead. Bobby's coming home shortly, Bobby's coming home shortly, something of that nature. Also the families of Leopold and Loeb themselves, like their parents and their relatives, they also went into just kind of an enormous amount of suffering because of this. And that's bad. This is something that, yes, of course, we want to understand more about humanity, but we have to recognize the heinous nature of this crime. And Nathan Leopold, who did live longer than Loeb, of course. Loeb was killed in prison, and Nathan Leopold was paroled. And he wrote a memoir, I want to say it was called 99 to Life or something like that, 99 Years to Life. And he really didn't want to talk about the case. He wanted to talk about his rehabilitation after the fact. But the thing that stood out to me is that once Loeb is out of the picture, Nathan Leopold seemed rather able to kind of make the sort of decision, make the sort of awareness, make the sort of acceptance that he was wrong, he's not above society, and he was kind of under the spell of Loeb, as we said, something of that nature. And there's a very famous line from Nathan Leopold Jr. when he's like, I am over being 19. Just sort of recognizing that these were kind of some arrogant individuals that were around the college age, and they thought that they were somewhat above other people. There definitely is that element, but apathy and indifference weren't the driving factors here. The thing that I was very hesitant to say in this recording is that I was about to just call Loeb the bad seed, the toxic element, the contaminant. I wanted to say like he was just the bad seed and he kind of pulled Nathan Leopold into it, but the fact of the matter is, if somebody's going along with something like this, they probably have some messed up elements of their own. I mean, bad influence is a bad influence, but at this age, at 19, you would really think that there could be some other things going on. Anyway, this is a very short recording, total commentary thing on this. We're not really putting forward any sort of theory. I just really wanted to discuss some of the things that I've been thinking about in regards to the motivations that drive these people to commit these heinous acts. And one of the things that I would sort of like to do was, I would like to perhaps do something about the case of Bobby Franks, the boy who was murdered, about him and his family. Years ago, I was talking about a different case. It was the Aurora shooter in Colorado, James Holmes. And I was just writing some things online about how, just some things about his personal life, and someone was like, I don't want to hear about him. I'd rather think about what happened to the victims. People are just sensationalizing him because they want to get their ratings up, they want to get viewership. And I kind of had a little bit of a response when I was like, now hold on a second. We also mention these things because we want to understand what happened. We want to try and learn from this, because one of the things that we have to do when we're learning about psychology and history and culture and whatever sort of discipline you want to look at, social sciences, you have to learn everything. And I really felt that that person who made that comment is doing a little bit too much of picking and choosing. And I said all this, we're just kind of discussing on a forum at that point, and then she's just like, I don't think that's true. Let's not kid ourselves. There definitely is a certain amount of sensationalism in the world. There definitely is a certain amount of blowing things out of proportion, and there is definitely a certain amount of focusing a lot on horrendous incidents like Leopold and Loeb, like the Aurora, Colorado shooting. But I do insist that there's a genuine factor where humans want to just try and learn more about humanity. The mystery of mankind is man to himself, as they once said. But you have to learn everything. We can't just be like, hey, this stuff is dark and terrible, we're not going to cover it. So I guess that's bringing us to the end of this very, very little commentary discussion on Leopold and Loeb. I'm not an expert on this, and I should really have said that at the beginning. I just wanted to talk about kind of two psychological elements that are involved with this case. I really should have said, I'm not someone who knows the case inside and out. I saw some programs on it over the course of the last 20 years. I attended a presentation on it in Chicago recently. And what I would like to say is, I would really just kind of ask the questions at this point. What do you think about Leopold and Loeb? What do you think was the overall largest factor that drove these two individuals to commit the crime, the murder of Bobby Franks? Furthermore, how should we approach things that are dealing with murderers and serial killers? Does the media overly glorify them? What is the appropriate course of action? If you have anything to say at all, please drop a comment below. I would love to hear from you, and until next time.